you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Trulytics, the one and only comprehensive advisor transition management platform. This week on the show, I am joined by Dan Stickle, the CEO and founder of Estate Exec. And as the name of the company implies, we're going to be talking a lot about estate planning, but a specific angle of estate planning, and that is preparing the executor of the estate to be ready to handle all of the weighty responsibilities that is going to land on his or her shoulders. And this is a really important topic for the modern financial advisor. There's an incredibly high likelihood that many of your clients are going to find themselves in that position of estate executor, right? But they're going to lose a spouse, they're going to lose a parent, they're going to lose a sibling, and they're going to have to handle a lot of the things that come next. And it's not just planning for the funeral, right? There's a lot of things that go along with managing an estate. And chances are they're going to lean on you a bit for helping them navigate those waters. And Dan and the team at Estate Exec have done a fantastic job in building a tool that makes that process a lot smoother. And on the show, we've talked about this concept of being ready for emergency continuity, right? With true continuity to making sure that as a financial advisor, should anything happen to you, whether it's death or disability or other, or somebody at your firm, that there's a plan in place to help whoever's taking over in that situation navigate the process as quickly and as painlessly as possible to make sure the business goes on smoothly. And this is kind of like that for the individuals, right? And your clients are going to really appreciate that you're more knowledgeable on this topic. And, you know, just on a personal note, when Dan and I recorded this podcast several weeks ago, the memory of losing my grandfather last year was still pretty fresh in my mind, and thinking about my dad and my aunts and uncles and how they handled that. And luckily there's 7 of them, and they were all able to kind of, you know, bring their respective skills and knowledge and you know, emotional fortitude, if you will, to bear. And as I'm recording this intro, it's only been a few days since we lost my grandmother. Now, she was 90. She lived a very vibrant life and filled with love, and she's got lots of people there. You know, again, my father and the rest of his siblings jumping in and taking over and dealing with all the things that they need to deal with. And having it be so soon after we lost my grandfather, you know, they're kind of more prepared. They've been through this thing recently, so it feels fresh. But I wish I had known about Estate Exec before. This is a much more present challenge, because I think we would probably have been set up there. So I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode. I think it's going to be really good for you and your clients to again, be a little more ready here. And I think people will appreciate it. And I know you're going to get some great stuff out of this. Okay. I know it's a bit of a somber topic, but hey, estate planning's a very core component of most modern financial advisors' business. So anytime we can learn a little bit more, let's do it. Okay. All right. As always, before we get to the conversation with Dan, I'm going to ask you to make sure you have subscribed to the podcast. Make sure you like it if there's the opportunity to click that like button, and leave a comment, right? We're active on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, the YouTubes. If you like to see the video of myself and Dan having a conversation, swing on over to YouTube, the Trulytics YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel, give it a like, comment there. And of course, go to blog.trulytics.com, where you can find all of our episodes and the show notes. You can find some links to some other awesome resources. And lastly, and I promise this is the lastly one, if you have questions or suggestions for guests or topics for the show, please do send them in, podcast@trulytics.com, or use the contact form on the Trulytics site. Or you can always hit us up on the socials. We're active on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, again, YouTube. Andrea Risk, by the way, suggested Dan to me for this show. So thank you very much, Andrea, for connecting the two of us. Andrea is like batting 1,000. She also has suggested Matt Reiner of Benjamin last year, 2020. So she's crushing it. She's sending in the really high quality people that I think are sharing some good content that you're getting a lot out of. So if you know somebody, or even if that somebody is you, please do let us know. Podcast@truelytics.com. Okay, let's get to the conversation with Dan Stickle of Estate Exec. Well, Dan Stickle, so wonderful to see you. As I was saying when we first clicked the record button here, it's wonderful to see somebody in person that you've only had a phone conversation with. Great to have you on the show.
Good to see you as well. Very energetic.
All right. Well, yeah, look, I would like to credit just coffee or whatever for my energy, but I think I was kind of born this way. I've been kind of wired this way my whole life. So, Dan, we were put together. I'll try to remember who put us together, but when I first even just took the high level look at Estate Exec, I was like, I'm sold. I got to see more about this, learn more about this. And then you and I jumped on the phone, and right out of the gate, you shared the story of how you came to start Estate Exec. And I thought this is a story that every financial advisor needs to hear, right? So maybe that's where we'll start is you were a tech executive for years and years and years. You weren't an estate attorney. You weren't a financial advisor. You're in tech. Google is on your LinkedIn.
That's right.
As a place. So what was it that drove you to go, I need to do this?
Well, as you pointed out, I had been a tech executive for many years, and I have an undergraduate degree in computer science from Harvard. I have a master's degree from Harvard as well. I've started software companies in my garage. I've worked at large-scale tech companies from Bell Labs to Google, as you pointed out, and I've been fairly successful, and I've had a number of different CEO roles along the way. And so, as happens to everybody, at some point in their lives, their parents do pass away. And my mother passed away a little bit unexpectedly, but even before that, my father passed away. Both of them were a little unexpected. But they were prepared, and they had wills and all the rest of that. And it turned out I was named the executor in my father's will. And given my background, fairly technical, fairly smart, fairly accomplished, worldly wise, private investor, I thought I could handle this no problem. But as I got into it, I found out it was quite extensive and a little bit overwhelming, frankly. And so I decided to look into it more, and I went online, and I found that there were some encyclopedia-like tomes that you could purchase. And I did. But they're hundreds of pages of long, not really for the average person to read. And I did go through those books, but it's still a little challenging. There's some gossip-like sites on the internet that have little bits of tidbits about what to do, but nothing really to help you all that much. So I did hire a lawyer, and I think that's probably a good advice for most people. But hiring a lawyer to do your estate settlement is like hiring an accountant to do your income taxes. You're not done. You don't hire the person and walk away and say, I think I'll go play golf. This is great. No, what happens is the accountant that you hire for your income taxes turns around and says, okay, here's all the information that I need in this format, in my particular forms. You have a lot of work to do. Come back to me when you're ready. All right, so you still have a lot of work to do. It's a similar thing for estate executors. When you hire a lawyer to help you with that, if you hire a lawyer, there's still a ton of work for you to do, not just collecting the data, but also the real life work of cleaning out the residence and, having an estate sale and all the rest of that. So anyway, I got into this thing. I managed to muddle through it with my father's estate with the help of a lawyer. And I built some custom Google Docs and sheets to try to get through this thing. And I realized that this process hadn't really changed since the time of Charles Dickens. There's a famous novel he wrote about Jarndyce versus Jarndyce, which is, these lawyers are fighting their way through the estate settlement until this giant fortune is eventually whittled away to nothing. And nothing has really changed. It's still archaic. And I realized, given my tech background and my track record in starting companies, that there was a real market need for something here, and hence Estate Exec was born.
Yeah, it's so fascinating that you say that, and you're not the first person to mention that dealing with the estate of a loved one who passed, particularly parents, comes with just a lot of stress, right? Right at that time, number one, you're stressed because you lost a loved one, your parent, right? That's very stressful in and of itself. But most folks, like you said, no matter how highly educated they are and how accomplished they are in their own life, they're not prepared. This is not something they do. It's usually a once or twice in a lifetime thing, and it usually happens for most, if they're lucky, somewhat in your middle age, right, when your parents are in their elder years. So it can catch you by surprise, and it can bring a lot of work. You mentioned during our prep call that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 570 hours on this process. Is that right?
Yeah, we did a survey, not just of estate exec customers, but of the American population at large, and asked them all sorts of questions about the executor process. And one of the things that we discovered is that unsurprisingly, the amount of work that's associated with estate settlement varies with the size of the estate. It's not completely linear. There's ups and downs, and some very large estates are simpler than others. But on average, overall, it does take about 570 hours for the executor to get through all of the work that he or she has to do. Now, some of that might be probate court, some of that might be going through the house, some of that might be contacting the heirs. There's a lot of different pieces to this. That's one of the things that people don't really realize, how broad the executor responsibilities are. When you hire an accountant or buy a copy of TurboTax to do your income taxes, that seems complicated enough. Guess what? Income taxes are a tiny part of the overall settlement. You do have income taxes also as part of this process.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other things. And it's 570 hours spread out over 16 months on average. 80% of estates are finished within 18 months, but some of them do drag on for years. And very few of them are finished in less than 12 or 9 months.
And you mentioned something during the prep call, and this just kind of makes sense, right? First of all, this is an expensive thing. So if I'm a professional or a business owner and suddenly I'm the executor of my parents' estate, that's a lot of time that I could be using to do other things. So suddenly it's a very expensive endeavor for me. And you brought up the concept of executor compensation as a key question. And I thought maybe we'd tackle that here because, most of us are not running around being professional executors, right? But it becomes if it's the job is thrust upon you, it becomes something that's a logical question. Like, how am I making sure I'm compensated for this time and energy and attention to detail?
Yeah, and it's not just the executor that has that question. The heirs also have that question. Now, the heirs really have listen, if the executor doesn't really understand how much work this is going to do, or B, think how much the heirs know about the process. Almost nothing. They have no idea it's taking hundreds of hours. And if it is, should it really? Is the guy really being efficient and effective with his time? What are the rules with this? So we get many inquiries from people all across the country and Canada as well, asking how should an executive be compensated? And it turns out that those rules are specific, very specific by state. And some of them are a little complicated and detailed, and some of them are extremely vague. A number of states, for example, say that compensation should be reasonable. And that's it. They don't say anything else. And then what you have is established case law from things that have been taken before the courts that kind of establish what reasonable is. But you won't find that written down in some sort of guide anywhere. Actually, at this point, except for estate exec, because we've gone through and collated all these statutes and all the practices. And depending upon the state that you're in, it will show you the specifics, the relevant statutes, and then put all that aside. There's actually a calculator. So you put in the data that your state requires, and it will calculate it for you. Now, you can hire a lawyer to do that, and many people will. But even the lawyers take shortcuts and get it wrong sometimes. It can be complicated. And I think I mentioned to you on the call that, for example, New York State calculates executor compensation as a graduated scale of funds received and funds paid out. And so depending on the size of the estate, maybe it's 3% of the funds that you received and 3% that you paid out. And many lawyers will just combine that and say, well, it's 3% of the estate. But that's not really true. It's really, you divide it by half, and so it's 1.5% of the funds in and 1.5 out. And then depending on how long the estate took to settle and what happened during that settlement process, the funds in may not equal the funds out. It could be way up because the market went up. It could be way down because the house burned down or something like that. There's a lot of things that can happen in there. And so you can't just say, well, it's 3% of the estate, although many people do. That's actually wrong. And so that's one example. In Texas, it's actually a percentage of the cash received and paid out. Not cash that was in the estate on hand, though, not like liquid assets, things that you actually had to sell. And not cash disbursements to heirs, but things that you had to pay. So it gets a little complicated. And then, there are states that have reasonable standards, which has devolved to mean either an hourly rate or, again, a certain percentage of estate values. And we do all that. And we get many requests from people trying to figure it out. And you pointed out this is a stressful time. One of the aspects that came out of the study, and by the way, you can see the results of this on our site, estateexec.com, just look for the general statistics. And there's all sorts of bar graphs and details of this overall breakdown. But 44% of the respondents either experienced or knew of family strife that was caused by these sort of issues, not executor compensation alone, but just executor misconduct or perceived misconduct, or, just many of these things even lead to lawsuits and families, that never speak together, never speak again. And that's really unfortunate, because if you think about your audience with financial advisors, one of the things they're trying to do with estate planning is to ease that transition into the next generation, to make it smooth and easy. That's the last thing they want. They don't want their family arguing about this and fighting about this and all the rest of that. And so anything you can do to minimize that is helpful. And traditional estate planning, while very valuable, doesn't usually get into that family strife minimization and the nuts and bolts of what actually happens when someone passes away. You've done all you can to bypass probate and minimize taxes, but still, what actually happens? And so what we're trying to do here is to give financial advisors a tool that enables them to help that next generation as they go through that process, and maybe nurture the next generation of clients while they're at it.
I love the fact that you've just teed up my segue so perfectly here, in that, there's something I learned from an Evan Williams, who founder of Twitter, one of the founders of Twitter, quote that he says, you look at something that people do all the time, and if it's really a pain in the butt to do it, there might be a technology opportunity there to make it more efficient, right? And this is a classic example. And you and I were talking, and you just kind of teed this up, that there's more than just estate planning from the perspective, like how much money do you want to leave your heirs, right? Or who gets the money, right? Where do you want to be buried, right? There's a lot of other moving parts, and it varies so much, and it's archaic almost on purpose, right? Either because nobody's decided to apply the technology, or there's vested interests that have been there for a while. Like, hey, I make a good living with this being a pain in the butt to do. Let's just keep it a pain in the butt. No one needs to innovate here or whatever. Or maybe there's people haven't thought about it enough until you came along. Or I guess there's another possibility. The technology didn't exist until recently. That's another one. But one of the things that's really interesting to me is, you came at this with an after-death estate management, right? Because it was a real challenge for you. But more recently, as you mentioned earlier, the planning for the death estate planning, right? The planning for the planning and the handling of things is really where you're looking now. And there's some similarities between Estate Exec and True Continuity, which is a solution that Truelytics built for financial advisors for their emergency continuity planning, right? That, listen, it's one thing for you to have a continuity plan, but then there's the implementation of that plan that is really, really important. Who needs to be called, right? Which advisor is going to take over which accounts? What's the name of the landlord? Because we may need to get some new keys to get into the space. Or who's your key contact at a broker dealer, right? Maybe you could take folks through, since we haven't done it just yet, how the technology actually works. Because I was really, really interested in this. I think a lot of advisors are going to get a lot of value out of that.
Well, as you point out, there are a lot of resources that exist in the world today to help with estate planning, whether it's financial advisors or software tools, online courses, books, that sort of thing. And while it's a great thing to do, it's optional and not everybody does it. On the other hand, estate settlement is required. It's mandatory. The law makes you do this. And basically, there were no tools to help with that. So we looked at this and we said, well, where should we focus? We should focus on the part that's not being addressed by anybody else and build something that helps for the part that's actually required. It's unbelievable that that part didn't exist. And we did. But what we found is that we kept getting inquiries from people who weren't dead yet, and we're actually trying to plan ahead and ease the burden for their eventual heirs. And maybe these people had terminal cancer, maybe they were just planning ahead, whatever the cause was. We kept getting contacted by people that wanted to do this ahead of time. And as we looked into it, we realized that this is an important need, and there is this subset of people that are doing financial planning and estate planning, and they'd like to have some sort of continuity through the process. So what we started out with Estate Exec really had 2 and then 3 pieces. The first piece is automated step-by-step guidance of what you're supposed to do based upon the particulars of the estate, how big it is, where you live, what the contents of the estate are. This is all automated. There's no human beings involved. And walk you through this checklist with details and forms and places to go and all that kind of a thing. The second part of it is automated financial accounting. So listing all of the assets and the debts and the estate expenses that come in and the executor reimbursements and the sales of assets that you do and the distributions ultimately. So there's this integrated financial whole of all these moving parts that you can keep track of by hand or in a spreadsheet at first. And then you realize, wow, it's all interconnected. And when I sold this asset over here, it needed to show up in the estate account. And then I need to divvy that up into these different heirs. And it gets a little complicated. And then most of the time, you have to turn some of this into the court and you realize, man, you are in over your head because they have certain types of calculations that they want to track and keep track of. And to them, it makes sense. But to an average human being, it looks a little arcane. So we have those reports that print out for you as well. So once you put the simple things in, it does the complicated stuff behind the scenes. And so that's really what we've been trying to do. As with most modern consumerized technology, it looks like it's not doing much and it's so simple and you could do it yourself. But that's because behind the scenes, it's doing all the really heavy lifting that you don't have to know about. And then the third thing that we added were actually discounts for related services. So funeral flowers or junk hauling or estate sales or appraisals or things like that. So we coordinated with national providers or national associations of those services and negotiated discounted rates for our customers. We don't get a commission on this at all. We do this purely to help our customers make sure they're getting good experience and get a discount on those things. And so at that point, we like to say, wow, Estate Exec is really paying for itself. How can you not do this thing? So there are really the 3 components: the step-by-step guidance, the automated financial accounting, and the discounts. Now, what I mentioned we're focusing on is trying to ease that transition for the people who've actually planned ahead and have a list of their assets already or have a list of detailed instructions. How can we either work with them from the beginning or, better yet, automatically integrate with the tools that they've already put that into so that it can flow directly into Estate Exec and the whole thing can be seamless. And at the moment of death, you can just keep going without too much friction.
If I'm an advisor and I'm hearing this, I'm kind of doing a little hallelujah because a couple of things are going on in the advisor space. Number one, there has been a bit of fee compression, right? Where some of the traditional ways that advisors have earned their money via asset management or commission type stuff for assets have come down, right? So there's been a little bit of that fee compression. And so as a result, they're looking for new services to offer their clients, new things to do for their clients that are of value. And look, every client at some point in time is going to have a death, in either their own or someone in their family. Father Time is undefeated.
Let me just a quick aside on that. The thing is, 3 million people die a year in the U.S. approximately. every year. And they die once, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons there hasn't been a solution for this before, because there's not a lot of repeat business, as you can
Yeah.
imagine,
Yeah.
in this thing for an individual consumer. But eventually, every single consumer goes through this process.
Yeah.
So, as you point out, you're right. If you're a financial advisor, eventually, I mean, you hope that it doesn't happen for a long time, but eventually, every single client does have to pass away. And then there's the process of what happens for that client, and then the hope that you can transition that client into the next generation of clients.
Yeah. And, to build on that, if you're an advisor, when one of your clients passes away, their heirs or the surviving spouse are going to call you as one of their first phone calls. Chances are, right? Because you're a trusted advisor. They have
Right,
been leaning on you for life planning, not just for asset management, right? They've been leaning on you for a lot of this stuff
right.
for years and years. And so I would imagine any advisor who's listening to this or watching has encountered this issue where like, oh, here comes a mess, right? I knew this was coming, but I'm going to have to help. And sometimes it's more heavy lifting than other times. So this is a wonderful tool that takes some of that off their plate. And I think it's also something that can actually add value from a business perspective. They can actually offer a higher level of service. They can certainly charge a fee for doing this for their clients. So I think it's a really, really cool solution. As we get close to wrapping it up here, one of the things I wanted to make sure we hit on, and this kind of seems like a weird topic, but I want to talk about estate planning trends, right? I mean, death is a certainty, as we just discovered, but there's a lot of variability in it. And our modern lifestyle, I think, is causing some changes. I mean, I look at a classic example is I live here in Austin, Texas. My parents are up in the Boston area. My wife's parents are up in the Boston area, right? As is, her older siblings. If we are involved in any type of estate executor action, it's going to be at a distance, right? So that's one change. And I think more Americans, particularly now, like when they can start to realize I can live anywhere, I don't need to have to live in a certain city to do things. I think you're going to see that's probably common, people dealing with it from a distance. I also think folks are living longer, right? It wasn't super common to have when, I'm in my late 40s. You didn't know too many people in their upper 80s when I was younger. I mean, I'm sure there was people, but like I think it's becoming more and more common. The life expectancy is longer. So those are some trends. What are some other trends that you're seeing that maybe advisors might want to be taking into consideration for their business and working with their clients?
Well, just for a general observation, your point about the mobility of the society and the fact that you don't really live near your parents in most cases anymore, that's actually an interesting issue from a couple of perspectives. First of all, some states have laws and rules about you being able to serve as an executor if you're not a resident of the same state. So sometimes you're required to hire an in-state resident agent to help you with that. Now, the state exec will tell you if that's required, and that resident is really kind of like a paperwork checkbox. It's not really that significant, but it's still there. More interestingly, though, I think, is that this fits in with the rise of the gig economy, right? So before, when you were the executor, man, you rolled up your sleeves, you had to go to the house, you're scrubbing out the bathroom because you wanted to sell the place, you're going through the mail, you're doing all the, you're setting up a giant garage sale or estate sale, you're doing all these things. And many people will still do most of that, but it can be hard if you don't live there. Very hard. So you have to have this compressed time scale where you're, for this kind of physical aspect of things, where you are dealing with things very efficiently and very effectively, or you're going to hire somebody to help you do that. So just like, everybody used to cook and now they're hiring DoorDash and all these people to
Yeah.
bring them their meals or their meal kits, the same thing is starting to happen in this place as well. And what we're seeing is the rise of these independent executor consultancy firms. It's not really a big phenomenon quite yet, but we have a number of people that contact us. They're setting up this thing, or they've had it established for a while, and they want a nice software package on which to build their practice and make them seem more professional and just make them seem more effective. And so we see these people setting up in state or province after province, trying to move to the gig economy, even for a state
Yeah.
executorship. As far as the people living longer, that's a great trend, of course. But one of the downsides to that is that by the time your parents pass away, you can be pretty elderly yourself, too. I
Right.
mean, we have people calling us up. It seemed like they're in their 80s, Maybe they're not quite that old, but they may have slowed down themselves a little bit. And they may not be completely, on top of everything that they're dealing with. And that can be a problem. For example, we got a support call the other day where this person was having trouble making their accounts reconcile and balance. And as we got through helping them understand that they had to actually record everything that was in the estate when it started, not just at the end, we discovered that there had been a $50,000 life insurance policy which had been assigned to him solely. But he didn't realize how things work. And so he had just put that into the estate account and was divvying it up among all the executors. And so we were actually able to save him
Oh,
$50,000
wow.
just by helping him to understand things. And that's a little bit unusual, but it's not that uncommon that as you get into it, with the right help, things can go not just more easily, but better. And, you know, not only better in the sense that, the results turn out the way they can, but many times you can get challenged in court and you need to be able to defend that you did the right thing and use the right tools and that you didn't make mistakes. And it's hard to not make any mistakes in this process. But,
Yeah.
we're here to help.
I really love that you brought up the fact that, in addition to people having longer longevity in terms of their lifespan, you may have an elderly or we'll call it super elderly parent with an elderly client, right? So you may have a client
Right.
who's in their 70s who still has a parent alive. I mean, my parents are 20 years older than me. Like they had me really young. So hopefully they're around for a long time. But if they're in their 90s, I'm in my 70s, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
I look at my dad. He's getting close to 70 there, and his physical mobility isn't the best. My mother has some conditions as well, and so you just think about the physical stuff, and then their command of digital, right? Of being able to use digital tools because they didn't during their career they weren't using digital tools as much as a younger person might. They might be confused and overwhelmed by certain things. So you can absolutely see that if you're a financial advisor and you have clients who are in their 60s, you might want to ask them, like, how's your mom and dad doing? Because this might be a solution that you might want to offer,
Yeah,
the
that's a really
financial
good
advisor.
point.
Yeah, yeah.
And by the way, the person I talked about with that $50,000 life insurance, he had a lawyer, and the
Wow.
lawyer hadn't even told him anything about that.
Oh, man.
So, I mean, you really have to stay on top of these things.
Deduct that from his fee. That's what I would say. Deducting 50
Yeah.
grand from your fee. It's off. We've been, this is fantastic. I
One
assume,
last thing on that topic. We didn't talk about price points at all.
oh, yeah, let's
And
dive in.
estate exec is a $99 one-time fee. Um, I personally have dealt with clients. I remember one elderly woman that we were dealing with who called us up because she had been going through estate settlement for a couple of years now, and the lawyers were chewing up her estate. And she had already spent, I don't remember exactly now, let's just say it was around $2 million in legal fees out of a $2.5 million estate. Like she had
Wow.
chewed up almost the entire thing, and she was desperate and she couldn't get out of it. And she was hoping that our $99 piece of software she was gonna fire her lawyers and use this instead. Now, I'm not recommending that in all
Right.
circumstances. And I think that having a lawyer is very beneficial, especially if you're going through probate. But even if you go through probate, as we talked about at the very beginning, you still want some tool to help you with all this, to help you list all the assets and the debts and the cash flow transactions and all the rest of that. So one of the things that we built into Estate Exec was online sharing so that you can give your accountant or your financial advisor or your lawyer edit access or read only access. Or in reverse, if your financial advisor is the one that's bringing you into the tool, they can give you view only access if you're not digitally that competent, but you want to see what's going on, or edit only access, and you can coordinate and cooperate on which tasks have been done, and you can see that they're checked off, and that, oh, I had these bills that I paid, and all the rest of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a phenomenal thing to do. Right? So that actually brings me up. That's a really great segue to kind of my last question. I imagine if I'm a financial advisor, I'm hearing this, I'm like, yeah, this is a no brainer. $99 a year. I want to make sure that my clients.
No, $99 one time.
One time. I'm sorry. One time. Thanks. Better. Appreciate it.
I should be more, you know what? I should be more clear since we're talking to a financial audience here. $99 for a 5-year term. So 5 years is more than enough to settle almost every single estate that's out there. But if you're doing this 20 years in advance, you may have to, re-up a lot.
Yeah. But I was thinking, what a wonderful thing, right? Just incorporate this in your business, right? That, estate exec is part of what we offer all of our clients. Is there the ability for the advisor to offer this as or buy like a enterprise account? So if I've got 100 clients, can I come in and say, hey, listen, I need 100 clients. Can I do that?
Yeah, there's actually a couple of different ways that you can do that. So, at one level, yes, enterprises get discounts on the volume purchases, but also on an operational level, there's 2 ways that they can approach this. One, if they want to be really hands-on and manage all this, they can have a corporate license where they can delegate to different people within their office who can assign the pre-purchase licenses to different estates, and you can see what's all going on with all that. Or the other way, which is a little more hands-off, and also probably equally applicable to a number of financial advisors, is that you get a bunch of purchase tokens, really, codes. And what you do is you say, listen, you can use Estate Exec. This is going to be really helpful. As part of our service, I'm just going to give you a code. Go to this site, type it in. You can use it for free. Or you can make them pay for it, however you want to do it. But anyway, you get these codes. And when they type in the code, they get a little welcome screen when they first started off, and it's got your picture, your company's building, or whatever you want. It says, Estate Exec courtesy of Merrill Lynch or whoever it is. And then you go on from there. So it's a nice way to provide that feel-good emotional connection that you did something for them.
Yeah. I tell you, I don't do this kind of like off the cuff or disingenuously. I really do think this is a huge, good, frankly, solution that every advisor should be offering their clients, right? Because again, as you said at the open, this is something that everybody's going to deal with at some point in time, right? Every one of your clients is going to have a death in their family, and they may have to be involved with dealing with the estate, either theirs, their spouse, or a parent or other loved one. So why not provide this service for them? Either comp it as just part of your fee, or upsell. Right. I mean, say, listen, we charge $200 for this or whatever, and you layer it into your client's fee. But it's whatever it is, this is a real good thing, because as you mentioned, it can save them time and heartache, right, during a time when they need it most.
Yep. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you see the same vision that we do.
I do. It's what's fascinating to me, and it's one of the greatest things about what I do, right? Hosting podcasts and events that focus on the fintech and financial services space, but the entrepreneurial space more just as broadly, is I get to see a lot of really cool, innovative stuff and meet a lot of smart entrepreneurs who are just making the world, I think, a better place by creating solutions that you find yourself going, why didn't somebody do this before? Well, here we go. Well, wonderful. Dan Sickle, so awesome to have you on the show. I'm sure some people are going to want to follow up. They can go to estateexec.com.
That's right.
And also you're on LinkedIn and Twitter and all the other good places, I assume, as well.
That's right.
All right. Fantastic. We'll make sure we get those connections linked up in the show notes. Well, thank you very much for being on the show, sir. Great to have you.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always great to have you with us. As I mentioned at the top of the show, if you have questions or suggestions for the show, please do send them in, podcast@truelytics.com, or hit us up on the socials. We love to hear from you on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you like to hang out and chat it up online. We're there for you, baby, so let us know. Also, huge thanks to Dan Stickle of Estate Exec. I really appreciate the time he took out to share some things with us. And I know obviously he's trying to get the word out about Estate Exec, but I really connect with people who I can tell are mission focused, right? That their soul is in the company that they're building. And Estate Exec, as Dan mentioned at the top of the show, this is a personal thing for him. He's a very educated person, very accomplished professionally, and yet he felt underprepared and overwhelmed when it came to handling the estates of his parents who passed. So I have a feeling many of your clients can relate, right, to that issue. And that's why I thought it was really important to have Dan on the show. And I appreciate him coming on and sharing his story. Okay. All right. Before I let you go, please do make sure you are continuing to wear your mask. A few more months, right? Saw in the news today that probably by May or so, they're jokingly saying we're going to be swimming in vaccine. There's going to be enough vaccine for everybody, and they're going to actually have to work extra hard to promote getting people vaccinated. So please do keep wearing those masks until we get to a kind of critical point there where everybody has been vaccinated, okay? And keep your distance where inappropriate, and, be nice to each other, right? It just makes you feel better, okay? We will see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. See ya. Bye.